Hello and welcome. As the day begins, the town moves slowly and without urgency. The familiar sounds of daily life are still muted, settling into place. In this video, we quietly follow what a single ordinary day felt like, step by step, in a calm and steady rhythm. Before dawn arrives, the churchyard rests in a low, unmoving quiet that settles over the ground like a thin layer of cloth draped gently across the earth. The air is cool and slightly wet, holding the faint scent of damp soil and old stone that has absorbed moisture through the night. A shallow fog lies close to the grass, not thick enough to hide the rows of markers completely, yet dense enough to soften their edges and dull their sharp lines. The shapes of the stones appear rounded and patient, as if they have spent many years standing in the same places without interruption or disturbance. The church building rises at the edge of the yard, its walls pale in the dim light, its roofline steady against a sky that has not yet taken on any color. The first signs of morning arrive without sound or announcement. The darkness loosens rather than lifts. The horizon behind the town grows a shade lighter, though the sun itself remains out of sight below the distant edge. Moisture clings to the grass in small beads that gather along each blade. When touched, the ground yields slightly under weight, not soft enough to sink, yet still holding the memory of the night's dampness. The narrow paths that cross the churchyard appear darker than the surrounding grass, their surfaces pressed flat by many years of footsteps. At this early hour, the streets beyond the low boundary wall remain completely empty. The nearby houses show no movement at all. Shutters stay closed. No carts pass along the road. The town holds its breath in the space between night's rest and the day's labor. From the church tower there is no bell yet, only the quiet presence of the structure itself, its doorway closed, its windows dark. The keeper arrives along the outer path that leads to the main gate. His pace is unhurried and even, shaped by habit rather than urgency or haste. The gravel beneath his boots produces a muted, steady sound that fades quickly into the surrounding stillness. He carries little with him at this moment, only what is needed to begin the day. The key ring rests against his palm, the metal cool from the morning air. Each step follows the same line he has taken on many mornings before, guided by routine more than conscious thought. The gate stands set between two low stone posts. Moisture has gathered along the iron bars overnight, leaving a thin sheen that catches the faint grey light. When he reaches it, he pauses for a moment, not out of hesitation, but as part of a familiar sequence. The key is turned slowly in the lock. The mechanism responds with a dull, restrained click that does not carry far. The hinges move with a low, controlled creak as the gate opens inward, just wide enough to allow passage. Inside the churchyard, the air feels slightly cooler than it did along the road. The ground holds the night's dampness more firmly within the enclosed space. The keeper steps onto the main path, closing the gate behind him with care, so the latch settles without noise. His presence does not disturb the stillness so much as become part of it. The yard has known this movement many times, at nearly the same hour, across many seasons. Rows of markers extend in uneven lines, some leaning, some standing straight, others worn down until their edges blur into rounded shapes. The older stones carry faint carvings that are difficult to read in the dim light. Lichen spreads across their surfaces in pale patches. Newer graves appear as darker rectangles of turned soil, their outlines more distinct against the surrounding grass. The keeper's gaze moves across them in a so-practiced sweep, not searching for anything unusual, only confirming that all remains in order. The fog shifts gently with the slightest movement of air. It does not travel far, only drifting low across the ground and gathering in shallow dips between the graves. When the keeper walks, his boots disturb the moisture on the grass, leaving a darker trail that fades as the blades rise again. The sound of each step is soft, absorbed by the damp earth. Near the church wall, the stone holds the cold of the night. When touched, it would feel smooth in some places and rough in others where the surface has weathered over time. The building's presence defines the edge of the yard, its height creating a quiet sense of enclosure. Along the base, small tufts of grass push through gaps where soil has collected over time. No movement comes from within. The door remains closed until later hours when clergy begin their duties. The keeper follows the main path at a steady pace. His route is consistent from day to day. He passes the older section first, where the stones are closest together and the ground is slightly uneven. Here, the path narrows, shaped by generations who walked the same line during burials and visits. He keeps his steps measured to avoid brushing against the markers. The routine requires awareness of space, even when visibility is softened by fog. The air carries faint layered scents. Damp soil forms the strongest note. Beneath it rests the mild trace of old leaves pressed into the ground from past seasons. There is also the distant hint of wood smoke drifting from somewhere in the town where an early hearth has been lit. These smells remain subdued, never sharp, blending into a background that changes little from one morning to the next. As the light slowly increases, edges become clearer. The outlines of the boundary wall appear more defined. Individual blades of grass begin to separate visually instead of merging into a dark surface. The church tower gains subtle detail along its stonework. Still, the overall tone remains muted, with no bright color yet present. The keeper pauses near a recent grave, not to linger, but to observe its condition. The soil here sits slightly higher than the surrounding ground, still settling after being turned in the previous days. Moisture has darkened its surface. He notes whether the edges hold their shape and whether any disturbance has occurred overnight. Finding none, he continues along the path without change in expression or pace. Birds have not yet begun their full morning calls. Only an occasional, distant chirp breaks the silence, brief and isolated. The sound does not echo. It fades quickly into the open air above the yard. The absence of regular noise allows small details to stand out, such as the faint brush of fabric as the keeper moves, or the soft contact of boot against earth. Along the far side, the boundary wall shows signs of age. Some stones have shifted slightly over time, creating narrow gaps where moss has taken hold. The keeper's eyes pass over these familiar imperfections. Part of his role involves noticing gradual change, though at this hour he only confirms that no new damage has appeared. The inspection remains quiet and methodical. The sky continues its slow transition from dark grey to a lighter tone. No direct sunlight reaches the ground yet, but the fog begins to thin in places, lifting just enough to reveal more distance between the rows of graves. The markers no longer blend into a single field of shapes. Each one stands more distinctly, though still softened by moisture. From beyond the churchyard, the first distant movement of the town begins to stir. A door opens somewhere along the street. The sound is faint and quickly lost. No voices follow. The early hour keeps activity minimal. The keeper remains focused within the enclosed space, where his responsibilities start with observation rather than action. He reaches the central crossing, where two narrow paths meet. Here the ground is slightly more compacted, having borne the weight of many processions over the years. He stops briefly, turning his head to take in the yard from this midpoint. The view allows him to see the gate, the church wall, and the far boundary in one slow sweep. Everything appears as expected. No markers have shifted. No debris lies across the paths. The moisture on the grass begins to gather into heavier droplets as the air subtly warms. When brushed by his boots, the tips bend and release the water in small, silent movements. The hem of his clothing darkens slightly where it passes close to the wet blades. This is a familiar sensation, repeated across many mornings, regardless of season, except during the driest periods of summer. Time moves forward without any clear signal or marker. The gradual increase in light replaces the need for lantern use. The keeper does not hurry. The early portion of the day is reserved for this quiet survey, ensuring the grounds remain orderly before visitors or clergy arrive. The repetition of the task reduces the need for deliberate thought. Each turn, each pause, each glance follows a pattern established through long practice. Near the entrance path, small stones mark the edges where grass has been worn away over time. These borders guide movement and help keep the central route visible even when growth becomes thick. The keeper's eyes track along these lines, confirming they remain exposed enough to serve their purpose. If overgrowth has begun, it will be addressed later in the day. For now, the check is enough. The churchyard holds a steady stillness that does not feel empty, only settled. The presence of many graves creates a sense of continuity rather than absence. The keeper moves among them with quiet familiarity. His role does not require reflection at this moment, only attention to condition and order. The routine itself provides structure to the morning. As the sky lightens further, the fog continues to lift in thin layers. It does not vanish at once. Instead, it breaks apart into low, drifting patches that cling to shaded areas. The tops of the stones appear clearer, while their bases remain softened. The change happens slowly enough that it is noticed only by comparison to the moments before. From the church tower comes the faint preparation of the day's first bell, not yet ringing, only the subtle internal movement that precedes it. The sound is barely audible, more felt than heard. The keeper turns slightly toward the tower, acknowledging the familiar sequence that will soon mark the official start of morning within the town. He returns his attention to the path ahead, continuing the measured walk that completes the first circuit of the grounds. Each section of the yard has now been seen once in the dim light of early day. Nothing has required immediate correction. The space remains orderly, quiet, and unchanged, except for the gradual shift from night toward morning. The churchyard, enclosed by its low walls and watched by the still presence of the church, settles into this transition with calm consistency. The keeper's footsteps maintain the same slow rhythm as he moves toward the gate area once more, ready to begin the next phase of the day as the light continues to grow and the town prepares to wake. The light has strengthened enough to separate the shapes of objects without strain, though the sun itself still remains hidden behind the low line of roofs beyond the churchyard. The keeper stands for a moment near the small storage shed, set against the inner side of the boundary wall. The structure is plain, built from rough boards that have weathered into a muted grey over many years. Its door shows the marks of many years of use. The grain raised slightly where damp seasons have swelled and dried the wood again and again. He reaches for the latch and opens the door with a controlled movement that avoids any sharp sound. Inside, the air holds a different scent from the open yard. It carries the dry, familiar smell of wood, old rope, and iron tools that have rested in the same places for long stretches of time. The interior is dim, but the growing morning light entering through the doorway is enough to reveal the simple arrangement within. Along one wall hang the tools used most often. A shovel with a worn handle rests on 2 wooden pegs. The smoothness of the wood shows where hands have gripped it across many seasons. Beside it hangs a rake with uneven tines, some slightly bent, but still serviceable. A short-handled spade leans in the corner, its blade darkened from repeated contact with soil. None of these tools are decorative or finely made. They exist only for steady, repeated use. The keeper begins the familiar process of preparing for the day's work. He removes his outer cloak, dampened slightly from the fog, and hangs it on a hook just inside the door. Beneath it, he wears simple work clothing, suited for long hours outdoors. The fabric is thick enough to resist chill, but loose enough to allow steady movement. He checks the cuffs at his wrists, making sure they sit close so they will not catch on rough edges or protruding stones. While he works, between narrow rows. His boots receive quiet attention next. He lifts one foot at a time, pressing the sole lightly against the threshold to clear away clinging mud from the path. The leather is worn but intact, shaped by long use. The laces are pulled tighter, not hurriedly, but with the practiced motion that ensures they will hold through hours of walking across uneven ground. This small adjustment prevents later distraction and keeps his pace consistent. On a narrow shelf rests a pair of simple gloves. The material is stiff at the fingertips, where soil has dried into the seams. He picks them up, flexing them once to loosen the fabric. They are not used constantly, but they protect his hands during tasks that involve rough stone or damp earth. He folds them once and tucks them into his belt, so they remain within reach. A small iron ring holding several keys hangs from a nail near the door. Each key has a distinct shape, though only a few are used daily. He lifts the ring and weighs it briefly in his hand, confirming by touch which key belongs to the main gate, which to the church side entrance, and which to the shed itself. The metal is cool, but no longer biting with night's cold. He fastens the ring to a loop at his side, where it can move without striking loudly against other tools. On the floor, set just inside the wall, rests the lantern. Its glass is slightly clouded from past use, and a thin film of soot marks the upper vent. At this hour, it is no longer necessary for light, yet it remains part of the standard preparation. He lifts it, checks the remaining oil by habit, and wipes a faint trace of moisture from the handle with the edge of his sleeve. Satisfied, he sets it back within easy reach should the sky darken later in the day. The shovel is taken from its pegs with a slow, careful motion. He runs one hand along the handle, feeling for new splinters or cracks. Finding none, he rests the blade lightly against the packed earth floor. The rake follows, its tines giving a soft, dull sound as they brush the wall. He does not carry every tool at once. Instead, he selects what will be needed first, leaving the rest arranged so they can be found quickly without searching. This preparation follows the expectations set by the clergy who oversee the grounds. The keeper's role is defined less by spoken instruction and more by consistent upkeep. The yard must remain orderly. Paths must stay clear enough for processions. New graves must be ready when required. These responsibilities do not change from day to day, and so the preparation also remains steady and predictable. He steps just outside the shed and pauses to adjust the strap that holds the smaller spade against his side. The weight is modest, yet distributing it evenly prevents strain as the hours pass. The shovel is carried in one hand, balanced so the blade does not strike the stones along the path. The rake is set temporarily against the outer wall where it will be collected once the first inspection tasks are complete. The air has shifted from the deeper chill of night to a cool, workable temperature. Moisture still lingers on the grass, but the fog has thinned enough that the far boundary is now clearly visible. From the church tower comes the first measured bell, low and steady. The sound travels across the yard without urgency, marking the formal beginning of the day's rhythm within the town. The keeper stands still while the bell completes its slow sequence. This pause is not ceremonial in a grand sense. It is simply part of the shared structure that organizes daily labor. When the final tone fades, he resumes movement, stepping onto the main path with the tools prepared and his clothing set for work. He checks once more that the keys rest securely at his side. Losing them would disrupt the order of the grounds, so their presence is confirmed often without conscious thought. The gloves remain tucked where they can be reached quickly. The lantern stays by the shed door, positioned so it can be taken later without delay. As he moves, the fabric of his clothing produces a faint, regular sound with each step. The motion is steady, conserving energy for the long stretch of hours ahead. There is no need for haste. The day's tasks are numerous, but repetitive, designed to be completed through persistence rather than speed. Near the entrance path, he pauses to lift the rake and carry it a short distance to a point where the ground shows early signs of scattered leaves and small debris. He does not begin clearing yet. This is only a matter of placing the tool where it will be used first, reducing unnecessary walking later. Such small adjustments shape the efficiency of the entire day. The church door remains closed, though faint movement can now be sensed within, suggesting that clergy will soon begin their own routines. The keeper does not approach. His duties run parallel rather than overlapping. The grounds must be ready before visitors arrive, and this preparation ensures that later activities proceed without interruption. A light breeze passes through the yard, enough to stir the taller grass along the edges. The motion produces a soft, continuous whisper that fades as quickly as it rises. The keeper adjusts the collar of his clothing slightly, not reacting to discomfort, but maintaining a steady level of warmth as the morning continues to change. He takes a final moment near the shed to look over the arrangement of tools, confirming that each item is either in hand or placed where it will be needed next. Nothing is left lying across the path. Nothing blocks the narrow routes between graves. Order at the start of the day prevents small obstacles from accumulating. With clothing secured, tools selected, and keys fastened, the preparation phase settles into completion. The routine has been followed without variation, just as it has been on many mornings before. The yard remains quiet, the town only beginning to stir beyond the walls. The keeper turns back toward the central path, ready to move into the first active tasks that will carry the day forward at the same measured pace. The keeper returns to the main gate with the same measured pace, carrying the shovel at his side while the rake rests a short distance behind him, where it will be used later. The morning light now reaches across the upper edges of the wall, though the ground within the churchyard still holds a muted tone. The air remains cool, and the dampness in the grass has not yet lifted. He stops before the gate and places one hand on the iron bar, testing its position. The latch sits correctly. The hinge holds firm. This brief check is part of the daily opening, even though the gate has already been unlocked. The grounds must be ready to receive anyone who arrives, whether early mourners, clergy, or labourers passing through on other duties. He opens the gate wider than before, allowing enough space for two people to pass without brushing the sides. The road beyond shows the first small signs of movement. A distant figure crosses between houses, still far enough away that no sound carries. No carts approach yet. The keeper leaves the gate set in its open position and turns back inside, beginning the first full inspection of the paths. He follows the central walkway that leads from the entrance toward the church door. The surface here is more compact than the outer paths, pressed firm by years of repeated use. Small stones embedded in the earth help prevent the ground from turning soft after rain. He walks its length slowly, watching for anything that may have shifted overnight. A fallen twig lies near the edge. He bends, lifts it, and sets it aside against the wall, where debris will later be gathered together. At the first junction, he turns to the narrower path that curves through the older section. The graves here sit closer together, their stones leaning at varied angles. The keeper keeps his steps deliberate to avoid brushing against them. His eyes move from ground to marker and back again, checking that the path remains clear enough for careful passage. In one place, the grass has begun to press inward. He notes the spot without stopping, marking it for trimming once the rake is brought over. He pauses beside a recent grave where the soil still holds a darker color than the surrounding ground. The surface has settled slightly since the previous day. He presses the edge of his boot gently against the side to confirm that the border remains firm. No collapse has formed. The wooden marker at its head stands straight. Satisfied, he moves on without further adjustment. Along the boundary wall, he inspects the narrow strip where earth meets stone. Overnight, moisture sometimes loosens small fragments. Today, the line remains intact. A thin trail of moss clings between two blocks, unchanged from earlier mornings. He runs his gaze along the length of the wall, confirming that no stones have shifted and that no animal has pushed through loose gaps. The breeze is faint, but steady enough to move the taller grass near the far corner. The motion reveals a shallow depression where water tends to gather after rain. It is dry now, only darker from lingering dampness. He steps around it, testing the firmness of the ground with the heel of his boot. Finding it stable, he continues along the perimeter path. From the church tower comes another low bell, marking the continued progress of the morning. The sound carries evenly across the yard, neither loud nor sharp. The keeper does not look up this time. The rhythm is familiar and requires no acknowledgement beyond quiet awareness. He reaches the section where older markers have weathered down until their inscriptions are nearly smooth. Here, the path is less defined, shaped more by memory than by visible borders. He walks its line carefully, ensuring that no stones have tipped further during the night. One marker leans slightly more than before, though still secure. He places his hand against it, applying gentle pressure to test its stability. The base holds. He leaves it as it is, noting that it may need resetting on a later day when time allows. The inspection continues toward the rear of the church, where fewer visitors pass. The ground here shows more scattered leaves pressed flat by moisture. He uses the side of his boot to draw a few aside from the narrow walkway, creating a clearer line without yet bringing the rake. The motion is slow and economical, enough to prevent slipping, but not intended as full clearing. Near the church wall, a small wooden cross marks a burial from recent weeks. The soil around it has formed a slight ridge as it settles. he checks that the cross remains upright and that no footprint has disturbed the surface. The area appears undisturbed. He moves on, maintaining the same steady pace that has carried him through the entire inspection. The light has grown strong enough now that individual textures can be distinguished more clearly. The grain of wooden markers, the roughness of older stone, and the flattened lines of the paths all become easier to see. Shadows remain soft and short, suggesting that the sun is still positioned low behind the buildings beyond the wall. He moves back toward the central crossing once more, bringing the outer circuit to completion. This first inspection is not intended to correct every imperfection. Rather, its purpose is to identify what will require attention as the day unfolds. The keeper's route ensures that no section goes overlooked, even those areas that are rarely visited. At the entrance path, he comes to a pause again, looking outward through the open gate. The street now carries faint signs of movement. A distant cartwheel turns slowly, its sound muted by the distance between them. No one approaches the yard yet. The opening has been completed early enough that access is available without any delay. He shifts the shovel from one hand to the other, easing the weight across his grip. The handle shows the smooth polish that comes from long use. He plants the blade lightly against the ground beside him while he scans the nearest row of graves one more time. Nothing new has appeared overnight. No debris has fallen across the stones. A small bird lands briefly along the top of the boundary wall, then lifts away again without making a sound. The yard remains largely undisturbed. The keeper resumes walking, this time along the secondary path that leads toward the area reserved for future burials. The space is marked by fewer stones and more open ground, its surface kept level in preparation for eventual use. He measures the distance between two existing markers with his eyes, confirming that the spacing remains consistent with earlier placements. No stakes have shifted out of position. The soil shows only the faint impressions left by his own previous steps. He does not begin any digging. This stage is only for observation, ensuring that when the time comes, the ground will be ready without requiring sudden effort. Completing this final stretch, he turns back toward the shed, where the rake waits. The first inspection of the day has covered the main paths, the boundaries, and the most recent graves. Each area has been seen in the growing morning light. The grounds remain orderly, with only minor overgrowth and scattered debris noted for routine maintenance. The churchyard holds a quiet steadiness as the town beyond continues to wake. The gate stands open, the paths are confirmed, and the space is prepared to receive the slow movement of the day ahead. The keeper reaches the place where the rake rests against the wall, ready to begin the next cycle of work that will carry the morning forward with the same measured, repetitive rhythm. With the first inspection now complete, the keeper lifts the rake from where it rests against the wall and carries it toward the narrow path he noted earlier. The tool is held low, so the tines do not strike the stones as he walks. The morning has settled into a steady grey light, clear enough to reveal the small irregularities in the ground, yet still soft, across the surfaces of the markers. He begins at the edge of the older section, where grass has started to lean inward across the walkway. The rake moves in slow, even strokes, drawing the longer blades back toward the outer line. Each pull is deliberate and measured, not forceful, just enough to separate the path from the surrounding growth. The sound is a dry, muted brushing that blends with the faint movement of air through the yard. The work follows a consistent pattern. He clears a short length, steps forward, and repeats the motion. The rhythm is unhurried. The goal is not speed, but rather an order that will hold through the day. The narrowness of the path requires careful placement of his boots so he does not disturb the edges he has just set. When a clump of damp leaves appears, he gathers them into a small pile against the boundary of the grass, leaving them for later collection. As he progresses, the spacing between graves becomes tighter. Some stones lean toward the walkway, reducing the space available for passage. He adjusts the angle of the rake to avoid striking their surfaces. The tines pass close without making contact, guiding stray grass away from the bases. In places where soil has crept onto the path, he uses the flat back of the rake to press it level again. The steady repetition creates a quiet cadence. Pull, lift, step, and set again. The motion continues without interruption. The keeper's breathing remains even, matching the pace of the work. There is no need for sudden effort. The tasks are designed to be sustained across many hours rather than completed in short bursts. The ground here holds more moisture, and the grass bends easily under the rake. When released, it settles into a clearer line that defines the walkway. The difference is subtle but consistent. A person passing later would find the route easier to follow without needing to look down at each step. This small clarity forms part of maintaining order among crowded graves where space is limited. he reaches a point where the path dips slightly. Water had gathered there during earlier rains, leaving a thin layer of fine soil across the surface. He draws the rake across it several times, smoothing the loose material so it lies level with the surrounding earth. The strokes are light, preventing the creation of ridges that could catch a foot. Moving onward, he shifts to the next row, repeating the same process. The repetition does not vary. Each section receives the same attention regardless of how often it is used. Older areas, though visited less frequently, are kept clear out of respect for those buried there and for the expectations placed upon the grounds. Order must appear continuous across the entire yard. A faint breeze passes again, lifting the tips of the taller grass beyond the path. The cleared line remains visible, a slightly darker strip where the earth shows through. The keeper pauses briefly to straighten his back, not from strain, but to maintain a steady posture before continuing. He resumes the same measured strokes, extending the cleared section a few steps further. Where two paths meet, he works the crossing more carefully. This area receives the most foot traffic during burials and visits. He draws the rake in overlapping passes, ensuring no loose stones remain underfoot. A small pebble is nudged aside with the edge of his boot and placed near the wall. The surface becomes flat and even, matching the firmness of the central walkway. The sun, still positioned low, begins to send a thin band of pale light over the upper markers. The lower ground remains cool and shaded. The difference in temperature is slight, but noticeable on his hands when he briefly adjusts his grip on the handle. The wood feels less damp than earlier, though it still carries the night's chill. He continues along the next narrow lane between closely spaced graves. Here, the grass is thinner, worn down by past processions. The rake's movement is gentler, used more to gather scattered fragments than to pull back growth. A few brittle stems break with a soft snap, their pieces drawn into a small line along the edge. From the church comes the distant sound of a door opening, followed by quiet movement within. The keeper does not turn. His focus remains on the ground before him. The routine maintenance is expected to proceed without interruption, regardless of other activity nearby. As the cleared paths begin to connect, a subtle network of defined lines emerges across the section. Each walkway leads cleanly into the next, allowing passage without stepping onto the graves themselves. This order reduces later disturbance and preserves the shape of each plot. The keeper checks the alignment with a slow glance down the length of the row, confirming that no section remains uneven. He shifts the rake to his other hand for a short stretch, distributing the effort evenly. The motion continues unchanged. Pull, lift, step. The repetitive sequence steadies the pace of the morning. There is no conversation, no external direction, only the quiet task repeated across the ground. Near the boundary wall, where moss grows thicker, he clears a thin strip so the edge of the path remains visible. The rake's tines pass lightly over the surface, removing loose debris without disturbing the older growth fixed to the stone. The line between wall and walkway becomes clearer, guiding anyone who passes to keep to the proper route. A small pile of gathered leaves has formed from the earlier passes. He nudges it farther aside with the rake head, placing it where it will not scatter back across the path. These small accumulations will be collected together later, once several sections have been cleared. The process avoids repeated carrying and keeps movement efficient. The light continues to strengthen, and the fog has now mostly lifted from the open ground. The markers stand in clearer relief, their shadows beginning to stretch faintly toward the west. The keeper works through another row, maintaining the same depth of clearing, so the appearance remains consistent from one section to the next. As he nears the end of this portion, he pauses to look back along the path he has just finished. The difference is modest but steady. The walkway appears defined, the grass held back, the soil level. No dramatic change is visible, only the quiet result of repeated, careful strokes. He sets the rake head down and presses the surface once more across a small uneven patch, smoothing it into line with the rest. The tool is then lifted again, ready to continue into the adjacent row. The rhythm of maintenance has settled fully into place, carrying the morning forward with the same calm repetition that will shape the rest of the day. The steady motion of the rake slows as the keeper reaches the end of the row, and for a brief stretch he allows the tool to rest with its handle angled lightly against his shoulder. The work does not stop entirely, but the pace shifts into a quieter interval, where attention settles more on the surrounding atmosphere than on any single task. The churchyard holds a soft, continuous presence that becomes clearer as the morning advances. A light wind moves across the open ground, passing first over the higher grass near the boundary, and then threading between the markers. The movement is gentle and even. It does not bend the taller blades far, only enough to create a faint rippling motion that travels in slow waves. The sound it produces is subdued, a low whisper that never rises above the level of quiet conversation. It fades as soon as the air stills again. From the church tower comes the measured ringing of a bell, spaced at regular intervals. Each tone carries across the yard with a rounded quality, neither sharp nor echoing. The sound reaches the far wall, softens, and returns as a faint trace that blends into the open air. Between each strike, there is a pause long enough for the silence to settle back into place. The pattern is familiar and steady, marking the passage of time without any sense of urgency. The keeper resumes walking along the path, his boots pressing lightly into the packed earth. The contact produces a dull, consistent thud that is quickly absorbed by the ground. Where the soil remains slightly damp, the sound is softer still, more a pressure than a noise. His steps follow the cleared lines he has just formed, confirming that the surface lies even and free of loose stones. Beyond the wall, the town begins to wake in small, scattered ways. A distant cart rolls along a street, its wheels creating a slow wooden rhythm that reaches the yard as a muted vibration rather than a clear sound. Somewhere a door closes, followed by the faint murmur of voices too far away to distinguish. These traces of activity remain at the edge of hearing, never strong enough to disrupt the enclosed calm of the churchyard. The air carries layered scents that shift slightly as the breeze changes direction. Damp grass remains the most constant, joined by the mild earthiness of freshly turned soil from recent graves. At moments, a thin thread of smoke drifts in from a nearby hearth, then disperses before settling. None of these smells dominate. They exist together in a low, steady background that rarely changes from one morning to the next. He pauses near the central crossing again, not from fatigue, but to listen. The bell's final tone fades, leaving a wide interval of quiet. In that space, smaller sounds become more noticeable. The faint brushing of his sleeve as he adjusts his grip on the rake. The soft tick of cooling metal from the shovel blade resting against a stone. The distant rustle of a bird shifting somewhere along the roofline of the church. The sky has taken on a pale, even brightness, though the sun itself remains partially hidden behind the clustered buildings beyond the yard. Light spreads without glare, settling across the tops of the markers, and revealing their textures more clearly. Fine cracks in older stone become visible. The grain of wooden crosses shows subtle lines where weather has worn the surface smooth. As he moves toward the far side, the wind passes once more through a patch of taller grass that was left uncut along the boundary. The blades brush against one another with a soft, dry sound. The motion is repetitive and slow, rising and falling in the same direction. It creates a steady auditory backdrop that continues even as his own footsteps pause. From within the church comes the muted movement of early preparation, a faint shifting of wood, perhaps a bench being set in place. The sound is contained by the thick stone walls and reaches the yard only as a distant, softened presence. The keeper does not turn toward it. The activity is expected and requires no response. He resumes walking, crossing a section where the earth is more compacted and nearly free of grass. Here, his steps produce a firmer contact, a low, hollow tone that differs slightly from the damp areas. The change is subtle but consistent, marking the variations in ground that he has come to recognize without needing to look down. A small bird calls once from the boundary wall, then falls silent. No other birds answer. The yard remains largely undisturbed, the open space absorbing most sound before it can carry far. Even the breeze seems to move with restraint, never rising into a gust. The keeper rests the rake head against the ground and lets it slide forward a short distance, testing the surface for loose debris. The tines catch lightly on a thin scatter of dry stems, producing a faint scratching that blends into the surrounding hush. He lifts the tool again without breaking the calm rhythm. As the morning continues, the balance between sound and silence remains even. The distant town provides occasional low tones, while the churchyard itself offers only the quiet evidence of movement through grass and soil. The combination creates a steady auditory field that does not shift suddenly or draw attention to any single point. He passes near a row of older markers where lichen has spread across their faces. The wind moves over them without effect, leaving their surfaces unchanged. The stillness around these stones feels settled rather than empty, shaped by long presence and minimal disturbance. Another bell sounds from the tower, this time a shorter sequence. The keeper slows his pace slightly while it rings, not stopping, but allowing the sound to pass without competing noise. When the final tone fades, the yard returns to its previous quiet, as though the air has closed gently over the space the bell briefly filled. The scent of damp earth begins to lessen as the ground warms by a small degree. In its place comes the faint dryness of sun-touched grass, though moisture still lingers in shaded corners near the wall. The keeper's boots carry a thin trace of darkened soil along their edges, marking where he has crossed softer ground. He moves along the path that leads back toward the shed, maintaining the same measured stride. The rake remains balanced in his hand, ready for the next section of clearing. Around him, the churchyard holds its calm arrangement of stone, grass, and open sky, with only the quiet interplay of wind, distant bells, and muted town sounds marking the slow passage of the morning. As the morning settles into a brighter, steadier light, the first visitors begin to appear along the road beyond the open gate. Their approach is gradual and unhurried. Footsteps sound on the packed earth outside before any figure fully enters the yard. The keeper notices the movement without turning his body at once. He finishes the short stretch of clearing before lifting the rake and stepping aside from the main path. A woman in plain dark clothing passes through the gate, her pace slow and deliberate. She keeps close to the center of the walkway, eyes lowered toward the ground ahead. The keeper inclines his head slightly as she passes, a brief acknowledgement that does not interrupt her movement. No words are exchanged. The custom within the yard favors quiet presence over conversation. He shifts his position so the rake rests upright beside him, leaving the path clear. The woman continues toward a row near the church wall, where several recent graves lie. Her footsteps soften as she reaches the grass, and soon the only sound is the faint movement of fabric as she stops near one marker. The keeper returns to his task once the path is open again, drawing the rake in slow strokes that avoid her direction. A short time later, another figure approaches, this one a laborer carrying a small bundle of wood under his arm. The man pauses just inside the gate, glancing across the yard to judge his route. The keeper steps back half a pace and gestures lightly with the rake handle, indicating the clearer path that runs along the boundary. The laborer nods once in acknowledgement and proceeds without further exchange. The interaction is brief, functional, and quiet. From the church door, a member of the clergy emerges, closing the heavy wood behind him with controlled care, so it does not echo across the yard. His robes move softly as he descends the short steps. He and the keeper meet near the central crossing. They exchange a few low words, spoken close enough that the sound does not carry. The tone remains neutral, focused on the day's expected duties. The clergy member gives a small indication toward the section reserved for future burials, then continues toward the gate to attend to matters beyond the wall. The keeper acknowledges the instruction with a slight nod. No further discussion follows. The responsibilities are understood without need for detail. He resumes his work, adjusting his route so he will pass by the indicated area once the current row is cleared. Two older townspeople enter together, walking side by side with measured steps. Their conversation, if present, remains too quiet to distinguish. As they approach a cluster of older markers, the keeper moves to the outer edge of the path, turning his body to allow them full passage. He lowers the rake head to the ground so it does not obstruct their way. One of them offers a brief glance in his direction, a silent sign of recognition. He responds with the same restrained nod before returning his attention to the ground. The pattern repeats as the morning continues. Visitors arrive singly or in pairs, each keeping their voices low. Some carry small bundles of flowers or simple tokens. Others come empty-handed and remain only a short time before leaving. The keeper does not observe their actions closely. His role is to maintain the space around them, ensuring paths remain clear and footing secure. At one point, a young assistant from the church crosses the yard carrying a narrow wooden board. He pauses near the keeper to confirm the location of a marked plot. The exchange is brief and practical, spoken in a tone that blends into the ambient quiet. The keeper indicates the correct row with a small motion of his hand, then steps back so the assistant can pass without navigating around tools. Throughout these encounters, distance is preserved. Conversations remain short, and once information is shared, each person continues their separate task. The keeper avoids prolonged attention toward any single visitor, allowing privacy within the shared space. His movements adjust subtly to the flow of people, shifting a step left or right to keep the main routes unobstructed. A man stands for several moments near a recently placed marker, head slightly bowed. The keeper, working along a nearby path, reduces the sound of the rake by lifting it between strokes instead of dragging it across the surface. The quieter motion maintains the cleared line without adding unnecessary noise. When the man turns to leave, their eyes meet briefly. A small nod passes between them. Then the man exits through the gate. From time to time, the clergy member reappears at the church door, crossing the yard with slow, even steps. Each pass includes a short exchange, no more than a few words, confirming that the grounds remain in order and that no immediate preparation is required. The keeper responds in the same calm manner, offering simple confirmation without elaboration. As the number of visitors increases slightly, the keeper adjusts his route to the less traveled sections, continuing maintenance where fewer people walk. This allows the central paths to remain open and undisturbed. The rhythm of his work does not change, only its location within the yard. A pair of labourers passes along the boundary carrying tools of their own, likely bound for work elsewhere in the town. They do not enter the rows of graves, keeping to the outer line. One raises a hand in quiet greeting. The keeper acknowledges with a brief tilt of his head, then returns to smoothing a small, uneven patch with the back of the rake. The atmosphere remains respectful and subdued. No voices rise above a low murmur. Footsteps stay measured. Even when several people are present at once, the churchyard holds its calm structure. The keeper's presence is steady within this movement, neither drawing attention nor withdrawing entirely, simply maintaining the order that allows each visitor to pass without difficulty. As the morning continues, some who entered earlier begin to leave. The gate opens and closes with controlled motions, the latch settling softly each time. The keeper notes the flow without counting or tracking individuals. His awareness remains practical, focused on ensuring that paths stay clear and that no object is left where someone might stumble. Between visits, stretches of quiet return. The keeper uses these intervals to continue clearing narrow lanes and pressing loose soil back into place. When another person approaches, he steps aside again, repeating the same courteous adjustments. The pattern of brief acknowledgement and respectful distance continues without variation. Through these small, repeated interactions, the social role of the keeper remains clear. He is present as a steady caretaker of the space, available when needed, otherwise unobtrusive. The churchyard accommodates both solitary reflection and necessary passage, held together by routine movements that neither hurry nor delay the slow progress of the day. By the time the sun has climbed high enough to send more direct light streaming across the yard, the flow of visitors begins to thin. The keeper shifts his focus toward the section set aside for future burials. He carries the shovel and the short-handled spade with him, leaving the rake propped against the boundary wall. This area opens up before him, marked by fewer stones and broader stretches of level earth. He starts by walking the outer edges of the space. His steps follow the faint lines that indicate plots measured out in earlier weeks. These markers are subtle, sometimes appearing as nothing more than slight shifts in the color or firmness of the soil beneath his boots. He studies them one by one, confirming that the spacing has remained even and that no edge has been disturbed by passing feet or by ground that has shifted over time. The inspection unfolds slowly and with care, ensuring that the layout stays consistent with the preparations made before. At one corner, a small wooden stake stands upright, where a future grave has already been assigned. The keeper kneels beside it and presses the soil around its base with the flat of his hand. He firms the surface so the marker will hold its position. The motion is careful and controlled, made to avoid any deep impression that might alter the level of the ground nearby. Once the stake feels secure beneath his touch, he rises to his feet and steps back a short distance. From there, he checks that it aligns properly with the neighboring markers. He measures the width between two existing plots by pacing the distance with even steps. Each stride is familiar to him, practiced over many days so that the spacing remains uniform without needing rope or measuring rod. Satisfied that the interval has not changed, he marks the boundary lightly with the edge of the spade. A shallow line is drawn that will guide the work to come. The shovel is then set into the soil with gentle pressure. This is not to begin full digging, but rather to test the firmness beneath the surface. The blade enters only a short depth before he withdraws it again. The earth holds together without crumbling, which tells him it will be workable when the time comes. He smooths the small opening with the back of the blade so that no uneven patch remains visible. Nearby, a patch of ground shows slight settling from an earlier burial. The surface has dipped by a narrow margin, creating a shallow hollow that needs correction. He uses the spade to pull a thin layer of loose soil from the edge and spreads it across the depression. With 2 slow passes, he presses it level, restoring the gentle rise that matches the surrounding area. The correction is modest, but it keeps the ground even for those who may walk there in the days ahead. He moves next to a simple wooden frame stored along the wall. This frame is used to to guide the outline of new plots. Lifting it with both hands, he carries it a few steps and sets it down where the next space is expected to be prepared in the coming days. The frame rests flat against the earth. Its corners align with the faint boundary marks already present. He adjusts it by small increments until the edges sit parallel with the existing rows. The tools receive brief attention as well. He wipes a thin layer of damp soil from the shovel blade using a scrap of coarse cloth kept tucked at his belt. This prevents buildup that could harden later and make the tool more difficult to use. The edge of the spade is checked for nicks by running his thumb lightly along the side, careful not to touch the sharpest point. Finding it intact, he returns both tools to the ground within easy reach. From the church comes the distant sound of movement inside, suggesting that midday duties are underway. The keeper remains in the open section, continuing his quiet preparation. He walks the length of the area once more, this time looking not at individual markers, but at the overall alignment of the rows. The lines appear straight and evenly spaced, maintaining the ordered pattern expected of the grounds. A small cluster of stones near the boundary has shifted slightly, likely loosened by moisture from earlier rains. He crouches beside them and repositions each one, pressing them into the soil so they sit flush with the surface. These stones help define the edge of the burial space and prevent the path from drifting inward over time. Once they are reset, he brushes away loose grit with the side of his hand. The sun's light now reaches the ground more fully, drying the upper layer of soil while deeper sections remain cool beneath. The keeper tests this by pressing the heel of his boot into one spot, then smoothing the mark away with the flat of the spade. The surface returns to an even plane without leaving a ridge behind. He gathers the small wooden stakes that are not yet in use and arranges them in a neat bundle against the wall. Keeping them off the main path ensures they can be found quickly when needed and prevents them from becoming scattered across the yard. Order among tools and materials reduces unnecessary searching later in the day. A brief pause follows as he stands upright and looks across the open ground. No visitors occupy this section at the moment. The quiet here feels deeper than along the central paths. The only movement comes from the faint stir of grass at the edges where the breeze reaches through. He uses this moment to confirm that no debris has blown in and that the surface remains clear. Returning to the stake he adjusted earlier, he checks once more that it remains straight. A slight adjustment with 2 fingers corrects a minor tilt that has appeared. He then presses the soil again around its base, compacting it just enough to hold through the day's activity. The motion is slow and precise, avoiding any disturbance beyond the immediate spot. The shovel is lifted and carried back toward the central path, but he stops midway to smooth a narrow line where footsteps have begun to form a shallow track across the prepared area. Using the back of the blade, he erases the marks, restoring the uniform appearance of the ground. This helps maintain clear boundaries so that future work can proceed without confusion. As he reaches the edge of the section, he turns and takes one final look across the prepared spaces. The rows remain aligned. The markers stand upright. The surface lies level and undisturbed. These quiet confirmations complete this cycle of responsibility, ensuring that when the next burial is required, the ground will already be ready to receive it without haste or delay. He sets the shovel down briefly to brush remaining soil from his gloves, then lifts both tools again and begins walking back toward the more frequently used paths. The midday light holds steady, and the churchyard continues in its calm order, shaped by these small and repeated acts of preparation and care. As the day moves past its midpoint, the keeper returns from the open burial ground and makes his way toward the older rows. Here, the paths narrow and the markers stand closer together. The sun now sits higher in the sky, though its warmth remains mild. The earlier dampness has mostly lifted from the grass, leaving only shaded patches near the boundary wall where moisture lingers on. The air feels drier against the skin, and the steady work begins to settle more noticeably into the body. He carries the shovel with a relaxed grip, allowing the weight to rest along his forearm between tasks. The repetition of walking, bending, and straightening has created a slow and persistent heaviness in his shoulders. It is not sharp or sudden. It is the kind of fatigue that builds evenly, shaped by many small movements rather than by any single strain. He pauses once near the central crossing to roll his shoulders back, then resumes his pace without delay. A thin breeze moves across the yard, bringing a slight coolness that contrasts with the direct light of the sun. When it passes, the fabric of his clothing shifts gently against his arms. The sensation is brief but steadying, helping to balance the warmth that has gathered during the previous hour of work. The sky above remains clear, with no sign of rain on the horizon. Yet, the keeper's routine does not change with the favorable weather. Exposure to whatever conditions arrive is an expected part of the role he fills. He returns to a section where the ground is uneven from years of settling. Using the back of the shovel, he presses down a small ridge that has formed along the edge of the path. The motion requires measured pressure rather than force. He repeats it twice, smoothing the line until the surface matches the surrounding earth. When he straightens again, he takes a slow breath, allowing the brief exertion to pass before moving on. Long stretches of solitude fill this part of the afternoon. Visitors have become scarce, and the church door remains closed for the moment. The sounds from the town drift in only occasionally, faint and distant. Without conversation or interruption, the rhythm of the work becomes more pronounced. Each step, each lift of the tool, each adjustment of soil follows the same quiet sequence. He shifts the shovel from one hand to the other to ease the strain across his grip. The handle shows a darker polish where it has been held most often over the months. His gloves, now lightly dusted with dry soil, move with a softer friction against the wood. The change reduces pressure on his palm and allows the movement to continue without pause. Clouds begin to gather in thin layers high above, softening the brightness without dimming the day. The light becomes more diffuse, spreading evenly across the stones and grass below. In this gentler illumination, the yard appears flatter and calmer, with fewer sharp contrasts to catch the eye. The keeper continues along the boundary, checking that no loose debris has collected where the wind tends to push it. He stops near a marker that leans slightly outward toward the path. Earlier it had been stable, but the shifting ground has allowed a small change in angle. He places both hands against the stone and applies steady, gradual pressure, guiding it back to a more upright position. The base resists at first, then settles into a firmer stance. He releases it slowly, watching to ensure it does not tilt again. Satisfied, he presses the soil at its base with the side of his boot to secure it further. The repeated bending and straightening draws attention to the weight in his lower back. He responds by slowing his movements rather than forcing them through. The pace remains consistent, avoiding any sudden effort that might deepen the strain. This adjustment is part of the learned rhythm of long outdoor labor, where endurance depends more on moderation than on speed. A brief gust of wind crosses the yard, stronger than the earlier breeze. It lifts a scatter of dry stems and carries them a short distance before they settle again near the wall. The keeper walks over and gathers them into his hand, placing the small bundle beside the existing pile of debris. The action is simple, yet it prevents the pieces from drifting back across the cleared path. From the church tower comes a single bell, marking the progression of the afternoon. The tone is lower than the earlier sequence, spaced with a longer pause afterward. The sound seems to rest in the air for a moment before fading. The keeper stands still while it rings, then resumes walking once the quiet returns. His steps now follow the outer perimeter, a route that requires fewer turns. The longer, straighter line allows his stride to settle into an even cadence. The ground here is firmer, reducing the need for constant adjustment. He uses this stretch to carry the rake from its resting place to another section that will need attention later, distributing the tools so that each area is prepared in advance. Solitude deepens as the afternoon progresses. No new visitors enter through the gate. The town's distant activity continues, but it remains a muted backdrop to the work at hand. Within the churchyard, only the keeper's movements and the soft response of grass and soil mark the passage of time. The steady awareness of responsibility remains present, not as pressure, but as a constant understanding that the order of the grounds depends on these repeated tasks. He pauses near the shed to drink a small measure of water from a simple flask, then replaces it at his belt. The pause is brief, just long enough to ease dryness in his throat. He does not sit. Remaining upright keeps the body from stiffening and allows the rhythm of work to continue without a slow restart. Returning to the paths, he uses the rake to draw back a thin line of grass that has begun to fall inward again where the morning clearing was done. The strokes are lighter than before, more a refinement than a full pass. This maintenance preserves the clean edge, established earlier, preventing the need for heavier effort later in the day. The sky remains overcast in thin layers, keeping the temperature steady. The earlier warmth does not increase, and the breeze returns to its softer pattern. The keeper's movements settle into a quieter tempo, shaped by the accumulated hours of labor. Each action is deliberate, conserving energy while maintaining the expected standard of care. He completes another slow circuit of the yard, confirming that the markers remain upright, the paths visible, and the prepared ground undisturbed. The fatigue in his shoulders and back remains present but manageable, a familiar companion to the work rather than an obstacle. The churchyard continues to hold its calm order as the afternoon advances, sustained by the keeper's steady and solitary attention. The afternoon light begins to soften as the sun lowers behind the line of buildings that rise beyond the boundary wall. Shadows stretch longer across the churchyard, extending from each marker in quiet angled shapes that reach across the grass. The brightness of earlier hours fades into a more muted tone, and the air cools by a small but noticeable degree. Fewer people pass along the road outside. The intervals between distant sounds grow wider. Within the yard, the paths remain mostly empty, with only occasional movement near the far gate as someone crosses without stopping. The keeper continues along the central walkway. His pace is slower now, not from hesitation, but from the natural easing that comes as the day approaches its later hours. He carries the rake loosely at his side, using it only when a small adjustment is needed. A thin scatter of dry leaves has gathered where the breeze pressed them against a stone. He draws them aside with 2 quiet strokes, guiding them toward the edge of the grass. The motion is minimal, intended only to keep the path clear until a fuller collection is done. The longer shadows alter the appearance of the ground. Shallow dips become more visible where the light falls at an angle. The keeper pauses near one such place and presses the surface gently with the back of the rake, smoothing the edge so it will not catch a foot. The correction is slight, but it restores the even line that has been maintained throughout the day. From the church tower comes a late sequence of bells, slower and spaced farther apart than those of the morning. Each tone carries across the yard with a softened resonance, then fades into the cooling air. The sound does not signal urgency. It simply marks the steady passage toward evening. The keeper stands still for a moment as the final note settles, then resumes his walk. Near the rows of older stones, the light now falls across their faces at a shallow angle, revealing textures that were less visible earlier. Fine cracks, worn edges, and patches of lichen appear in gentle relief. The keeper's gaze moves across them in a slow and familiar sweep, confirming that none have shifted since the last inspection. A single visitor enters through the gate and walks quietly toward a marker near the church wall. The keeper steps off the main path, allowing the route to remain open. He lowers the rake so it rests against the ground without making a sound. The visitor remains only a short time, then turns and leaves with the same measured pace. The gate closes softly behind him, and the yard returns to stillness. The breeze has weakened, leaving the taller grass mostly at rest. Without movement, the space feels more settled, as if the day's activity has gently withdrawn. The keeper uses this quieter interval to gather the small piles of debris that were set aside earlier. With slow and methodical motions, he draws them together into a single bundle near the boundary, where they will be removed later. As he walks the perimeter once more, his steps are lighter, conserving effort. The ground, now drier on the surface, produces a faint and hollow tone beneath his boots. He checks the alignment of the boundary stones, touching one that had been reset earlier. It remains firm, holding its place as the light continues to fade. The sky above shifts toward a softer color. The brightness thins without sharp contrast. The church wall casts a longer shadow across the prepared burial ground, covering the measured lines that were visible at midday. The keeper pauses at the edge of this section, looking across the level earth to confirm that no footprints or disturbances have appeared since his last pass. From beyond the wall, the distant sounds of the town settle into a slower rhythm. A cart passes once, then silence returns. No new voices carry across the yard. The enclosed space holds a calm that feels deeper than earlier in the day, shaped by the reduction of movement both inside and outside the grounds. He returns to the central crossing and stands for a brief moment, letting the rake rest upright beside him. The long shadows from the markers now intersect across the paths, forming dark lines that shift slightly as the sun continues to lower. The effect is gentle, without sharp edges, and it emphasizes the quiet order of the rows. With the main routes already cleared, his tasks become smaller and more deliberate. He presses down a loose patch of soil near the entrance, ensuring the surface remains even for anyone who might still pass through. The motion is slow, using only the weight of the tool rather than force. Another short interval of stillness follows. No visitors enter. The church door remains closed. The bell does not ring again. The keeper walks once more along the length of the main path, from gate to church steps, confirming that nothing has changed. Each section appears as it did earlier, maintained through the day's repeated attention. The light continues to dim gradually, and the colors of grass and stone shift towards softer shades. The air cools further, carrying a faint hint of evening dampness returning. The keeper turns back toward the gate area, his pace steady and unhurried, preparing for the final tasks that will close the grounds for the night. The light continues to fade as the sun lowers beyond the roofs and narrow streets that surround the churchyard. The longer shadows that had stretched across the grass begin to soften at their edges, blending into the dimming ground. The air cools with a slow and even change, carrying a faint return of evening moisture that settles, first along the shaded areas near the wall. The keeper walks the length of the central path one final time, moving from the church steps toward the open gate. His pace is measured and unhurried, shaped by the same steady rhythm that has carried the day from its earliest hour. The rake rests against his shoulder, and the shovel is held low so its blade does not strike the stones. Each step falls in a familiar place along the packed earth. He pauses near the rows of older markers, allowing his gaze to pass across them in a slow and practiced sweep. Nothing has shifted. The stones remain upright, their surfaces dim in the weakening light. The grass between them lies mostly still, disturbed only by the slightest movement of air. The quiet here feels settled rather than empty, shaped by the absence of footsteps. From the church tower comes a final and subdued bell. The tone is low and spaced widely from any previous ringing. It carries across the yard and fades without echo, leaving the air calm once more. The keeper stands still while the sound passes, then resumes walking without changing his expression. Near the boundary wall, he gathers the small bundle of leaves and dry stems that had been drawn together earlier. He lifts them with both hands and carries them toward the edge of the shed, placing them in a shallow wooden bin, kept for such debris. The motion is simple and deliberate, completing one of the last small tasks of the day. He returns to the rake and cleans its tines with the edge of his glove, removing the thin layer of soil that has collected between them. The shovel receives the same quiet attention. Its blade is brushed until the surface is mostly clear. These actions are done slowly, ensuring the tools will be ready when next needed, without hardened earth clinging to their edges. At the shed, he opens the door and places the rake back onto its pegs, guiding the handle so it rests securely without striking the wall. The shovel is set beside it, blade down, handle angled slightly forward for easy lifting in the morning. The lantern remains where it was left earlier, untouched but checked with a brief glance to confirm it stands upright. He removes his gloves and sets them on the narrow shelf. The fingers rest open so they can dry. The keys at his side give a faint and muted sound as he shifts his stance. He reaches for them, separating the one that belongs to the main gate from the others by touch alone. Stepping back outside, he closes the shed door with a controlled motion, letting the latch settle quietly into place. The yard now holds a deeper stillness. No visitors remain, and the road beyond the wall carries only distant and fading movement. The sky has taken on a dim and even tone, with the last light spread thin across the horizon. He walks toward the gate, following the central path that has been kept clear through the day. The ground beneath his boots feels firmer as the surface cools. When he reaches the entrance, he turns and looks back across the churchyard once more. The rows of markers are now shapes in soft shadow, their outlines gentle and indistinct. He brings the gate inward with both hands. The iron moves with a low and familiar creak that does not carry far. Once closed, he fits the key into the lock and turns it slowly until the mechanism settles. The sound is dull and contained, marking the end of access for the night. For a moment, he remains standing just inside the boundary, listening. No bells ring, no voices approach. The breeze has nearly faded, leaving the grass at rest. The church wall holds the last trace of warmth from the day, though the air itself has grown cool. He steps away from the gate and takes a short path along the inside edge, confirming that nothing has been left out of place. The shed is closed. The tools are secured. The paths lie even and clear. Satisfied, he returns to the entrance once more. The light continues to diminish, and the details of stone and grass soften into a uniform dusk. The churchyard settles into a quiet that is steady and undisturbed, holding the same order it carried through the day. The keeper's footsteps grow quieter as he moves toward the outer path, leaving the enclosed ground behind. Within the walls, the space remains still. The markers stand in patient rows. The grass holds the faint touch of evening moisture. No movement crosses the paths. The churchyard rests in a calm and unbroken silence. As the last of the light fades, and the grounds return to their quiet watch through the night. By late afternoon, the shadows stretch longer across the worn paths, and visitors become fewer. The tools are cleaned and set aside, and the last small tasks are finished without haste. The churchyard returns to its familiar stillness, shaped by routine and quiet care. As the light softens and the gates are secured, the space settles into a calm, unbroken silence. The day's work leaves little trace beyond orderly paths and tended ground, with the town continuing its evening rhythm beyond the walls. The graveyard remains at rest, waiting for another slow and steady morning.